What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Triple Z Podcast. I'm your host, Isaiah Henry. Right now, Victor Wembanyama is odds favorite to win DPOY, Defensive Player of the Year. I believe he's like minus 180, and like second is Bam Adebayo plus 1600 or something like that. I'm not sure. And I'm having a hard time being convinced that Wemby can win Defensive Player of the Year, that Wembanyama is like odds favorite to win the award. And I get it. He had a phenomenal rookie season, unanimous Rookie of the Year, made first team all defensive team as a rookie. I believe he was the first rookie in NBA history to do that. But it's hard for me to give him that award when it really banks on the Spurs making or missing the playoffs. Because when we talk about the San Antonio Spurs last season, they were one of the worst teams, rightfully so. Like I said, like they got Victor Wembanyama, the number one draft pick in the 2023 draft class, and they went from there. You feel me? Like they're one of the worst teams. I believe they probably finish maybe 11th, 12th in the Western Conference, and it wasn't always a beautiful sight seeing San Antonio play basketball, right? It was great to see Wemby and seeing his progression throughout the season, but overall as a team, the San Antonio Spurs were one of the worst teams to watch. It's just hard for me to imagine Wemby with the Defensive Player of the Year and the Spurs not being in the playoffs, not making the playoffs. Because if you ask me personally, I believe DPOY is the second most important award behind MVP. Once MVP comes out, everybody's like, all right, boom. It's Joel Embiid, it's Giannis Antetokounmpo, it's Nikola Jokic. The second award most people are thinking about after MVP is DPOY. Outside of Rookie of the Year, because you're a rookie, you shouldn't have the expectation to carry an entire franchise to the postseason or to a winning season, right? Every other award, MVP, Sixth Man of the Year, Coach of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, every other award requires winning. And with the San Antonio Spurs, there's a very high chance they don't make the playoffs, especially in the Western Conference. Now, granted, they've gotten better. They've gotten a little bit more competitive, adding Chris Paul and adding Harrison Barnes, two veteran players that can help add a lot more to this young San Antonio roster team and can teach Victor, the way of the NBA. And with Chris Paul being one of the greatest point guards of all time and Wemby being one of the greatest prospects of all time, I like that collaboration. I like that duo between CP3 and Victor, because a problem for the San Antonio Spurs, and it was such an obvious problem. It didn't happen all the time, but it happened quite often that Wemby would be wide open, and not Jones, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sokan, not Zach Collins, like whoever was on the court, they couldn't get him the ball, whether he was running out in transition, whether he was rolling to the rim, whether he was trying to get a lob, whether he was wide open for a three-point shot. Like, it's very hard to miss Victor on the court when he's like 7'4", 7'5". He takes up majority of the court. Like, he's not hard to miss. And I feel like San Antonio failed Wemby in a way to put him in a position to be successful, because they missed a whole bunch. There was a whole bunch of opportunities where Wemby was wide open for a play and San Antonio just couldn't give him the ball. I think having Chris Paul on this roster will make Wemby's life a little bit more easier, especially on the offensive side, because we know what he can do defensively, right? But offensively, I think it is going to add a lot more to his game with Chris Paul being able to run the show and being able to be a floor general for the San Antonio Spurs. But let's say the Spurs finish as the 11th seed, even though they added Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, right? Two great pickups for them. Are we really going to give Victor DPOY even though the Spurs didn't make the playoffs? That's hard for me to imagine. That's very hard for me to imagine, because since the award was created in 1983, I believe, there hasn't been a single player that's won DPOY and haven't made the playoffs. Where the Spurs, I mean, they can't match up with the Lakers, the Golden State Warriors, the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Mavericks, the Kings, who else? The Thunder. Like, they can't match up with any of these other teams. They really can't. And I'm just curious to know even with the additions of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, Spurs won 28 games last season with CP3 and Harrison Barnes. Does that make the Spurs a 40 win team next season for the 2024-2025 season? I'm not sure. And don't get me wrong, Wemby is a great individual. He's a great individual defender. And I think in this decade, there's 6 more years left, he can win possibly 4 out of the next 6 DPOYs. But in his second season, I don't see him winning that award and also having the Spurs making the postseason. Because winning matters. It really does. And it's not that Wemby isn't capable of winning Defensive Player of the Year. It's just that the Spurs, it's really relied heavily upon the Spurs and what they have around Wemby. If they can potentially make the play-in and then hopefully, who knows, make the 7th or 8th seed. Because here's the thing. If the Spurs can make the 7th or 8th seed, give Wemby DPOY. It might be unanimous. Give him DPOY. Because I guarantee you, let's say the Spurs win 45 games. They're in the play-in, they win 1 game, they win 2 games here, and they're in the 8th seed. I guarantee you 80%, 80 to 85% of those wins were because of Victor Wembanyama's defense on the court. And my favorite aspect of his defensive, ability was the Spurs will commit a turnover. Wemby's the first player to get back. It's a 3-on-1 break, and the opposing team doesn't even think twice about attacking the rim or applying pressure towards the rim. Wemby doesn't even have to put his hands up. Like, he just stands in front of the rim, and the other team literally kicks it back out to the top of the key. Like, that was my favorite thing to watch about Victor Wembanyama. Like, his defensive presence was felt everywhere on the court. Like, that's probably the number one scouting report when you're going against the San Antonio Spurs. Now, granted, they're not a great team, right? And who knows? Maybe they might make some moves at the trade deadline where they still have enough draft picks so they can improve their roster. Maybe they might, they might be competitive, but they might still fall low in the standings to the point where they can get a high draft pick in next year's rookie draft. But maybe Cooper Flag. I don't know. I doubt it though. As a player, when you're awarded, MVP, DPOY, 6 Man of the Year, Coach of the Year, that means what? Your team is winning. You put your team in a position to be successful in either standing, East or West, and pull them through to the NBA playoffs. That's not going to happen with the Spurs. And if it does, I'll come back on this channel and say I was wrong. I have no problem admitting I was wrong, but it's just hard for me to imagine that Wemby can win DPOY and the Spurs are ranked 12th, 13th in the standings. When you win these type of awards, it means you're winning. It means you're winning. Like I said, since the award was created in 1983, there hasn't been a single player that's won DPOY and haven't made the postseason. Come on, man. Like, I know it's obvious to give him the award because what he was able to do last season individually as a defender, but it shouldn't be a guaranteed. It shouldn't be a guarantee. And I understand why the odds are in his favor to win the award. Like, he was phenomenal. He was shutting everything down. Like, when he was off the court, you saw why the Spurs were one of the worst defensive teams in the league. But when he was on the court, it was equivalent, I believe, to a top 10 defense, they said, the numbers say. Based on how the Spurs do next season, 2024-2025 season, that will play a massive role whether or not Wemby wins Defensive Player of the Year. That'll play a if the Spurs make the 8th seed, if they just barely make the 8th seed, give Wemby the award. And it can be unanimous if you want to. Majority of their wins is going to be because of Victor's defense. I guarantee you. It's almost going to have the same impact where last season for the Lakers, majority of their wins was because of Anthony Davis' defense. Wemby has to have that type of impact on the Spurs in order for them to make the playoffs. And I don't know. Wemby's a great player. He deserved every single award and accomplishment he made in his rookie season. But I don't think his defense is to that level where it's taken over an entire franchise and pulling them through to the postseason. I don't think it's up to that degree yet. Like, Steph Curry's shooting was the reason for the Warriors being a winning franchise. LeBron James being a great all-around basketball player was the reason the Cavs, the Heat, the Lakers won championships. Magic Johnson's facilitating and passing and IQ was the reason for the Lakers winning championships. Kobe Bryant's scoring, Shaq's dominance, Tim Duncan's post-up and, defensive abilities. That's the reason for all these other teams winning championships. I'm not sure if Wemby's defense, while it is great, while it, the eye test says like he has the potential to be the greatest defender of all time, while it is obvious, I don't think right now in his second year it will take over a franchise and lead them to the playoffs. Because the pieces around Victor Wembanyama isn't that great. Like, Keldon Johnson is a pretty solid NBA player. Jeremy Sokan, he was put in the point guard position. That was awful. Hopefully he can have another bounce back year. You got Chris Paul to be the floor general. You got Harrison Barnes, who can still play at a pretty solid level in the NBA for his age. You got Greg Popovich, one of the greatest coaches of all time still. It shouldn't be a shocker if the Spurs can't compete with Minnesota, the Mavericks, Golden State, the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Sacramento Kings, the Thunder. It shouldn't be a shock if the Spurs are getting their asses handed to them by these other great teams. Because the Western Conference is chaotic, it's mayhem, it's fun, it's competitive, it's filled with great superstar players, but it's also filled with great teams. And the Spurs are not a great team. They have a great player in Wemby, but they are not a great team. You need a great team in order to win in the NBA. And right now, how the Spurs are constructed, they're not a great team. They may win, instead of 28 games, they may win 36, 37, but that won't be enough to make the playoffs. That won't even be enough to make the play-in in the Western Conference. Like, if the Spurs were in the Eastern Conference, they might be a top 6 seed maybe, with the additions of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes. They might be a top 6 seed. They have a good chance of making the play-in. But in the Western Conference, they don't stand a chance. And I expect Wemby to have another year where he's blossoming in his second year. Instead of 21 points that he averaged last season, he might average 25. Instead of 10 rebounds, he might average 12. Instead of 3 blocks, he might average 5. Like, he has that much potential to be a great player. The way how the Spurs are constructed, the team they have around him, it's not going to put him in a position to win Defensive Player of the Year. It may seem obvious. I get it. He just wreaks havoc defensively. And like I said, out of the next 6 years, he may win 5 out of the next 6 or 4 out of the next 6. But this may be the year where he doesn't win it. I know it's obvious. I know the odds are in his favor. The Spurs are going to have a lot to do on if Wemby wins Defensive Player of the Year or doesn't win Defensive Player of the Year. Like I said, it's the second most important award to me right after MVP. And all these awards, outside of Rookie of the Year, requires winning. That's the biggest evidence to giving someone an MVP, a DPOY, a Sixth Man of the Year, Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year. Winning matters in the NBA. And if the Spurs can't win 40-plus games, 45-plus games in a stacked Western Conference, I don't think Wemby deserves Defensive Player of the Year. Because Defensive Player of the Year means your defense was pivotal for your team's success. Was pivotal. All those years when Rudy was Defensive Player of the Year with the Jazz were a top 3 seed in the Western Conference. Like, when Dwight Howard won Defensive Player of the Year, the Magic were one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. Like, come on now. Like, winning matters in this league. I'll say it right here. I don't think Wemby won't win Defensive Player of the Year if the Spurs don't make the playoffs. I'm going to just say it like that. Thank you guys for listening to the Triple Z Podcast. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Zzz.